Thank you, Jaime, for having invited me to talk to you, and thank you for this wonderful opportunity. I thought that there are two reasons why my presentation is what it is. I restricted the presentation to the period of 20 years that came from 1985 to 2005. This is a very important period for the company. But it's an interesting case, and that's one of the reasons, of course. But the other reason is that I left the company. I retired from the company 3 years ago. And many things have happened ever since, and many things happened from 2006 up to now. And it's my concept, my philosophy that one should leave those that are acting to answer the questions that are happening now. And so that's why I restricted my presentation to this period. You will see that this will give you enough, I hope, enough opportunity to ask many questions. Anyway, there is two parts to my presentation, really. One is the description of this 20 years of growth and what happened over those 20 years in a very brief way, of course. And then another brief discussion of what were the major challenges that the company faced throughout this period. And then we'll have a Q&A for as long as you want to have me here. It's an interesting thing that in 2006, CEMEX became 100 years old. It started as a relatively small company in the northeast of Mexico. It did, of course, develop along 80 years because the Monterrey business community is famous for being a growth-oriented community. Work ethics in Monterrey are very strong. People are very industrious. Entrepreneurship is something that is very strong. And so the company grew over these 80 years through building new plants and acquiring relatively smaller companies in Mexico. Together with this, it was very important for the company the development of a cost containment culture. And cement is an industry that requires a lot of maintenance if you want to run your plants well. So that is something that the company developed quite strongly. I think that the other thing that I need to say here is that up to 1985, at least from my point of view, cement was perceived as a very boring industry. Nothing really happened in a cement plant, and no one really ever thought about cement. And we live in cement, and cement is all around us, but we never really think about it as something that is in any way glamorous, or it's not a consumer product or something that you see advertised. This is up to 1985. Now, this is the view that we had in 1992, 93 of what the company was having in 1985. The company didn't have this view at that point in time. Is this issue of strategic position that was not really something that the company was thinking of. CEMEX was a small company in Mexico, successful, growing, but within Mexico, and not really concerned about what's happening in other places. And because of the lack of this vision, or this limited vision, the company entered into a diversification process in the mid-80s, 85, 86, and made investments in tourism. In fact, made an association with Marriott International, to build 10 hotels in Mexico. 2 of them were started in '85. The company acquired significant shareholding of Celanís Mexicana, a petrochemicals company. There were several mining projects that the company was participating in, and there was many other projects that could have led the company into entering into other businesses. But I think that all this went on for '85, '86, '87. The company acquired another cement company within Mexico in '87. But towards '88, '89, the Mexican political situation started to change. The new government that was coming in '89 was clearly sending the message that the Mexican economy was going to open up to the world. And because of the entering into the GATT, General Agreement, Trade and Tariffs, and the North American Free Trade Agreement, negotiations that started, in fact, in '89, there was a clear view now that the market was going to be open. And because of the relatively vulnerable position of the company had to rethink what it was doing. There was the issue that if the economy was going to be open for an investment, CEMEX had to compete in petrochemicals, in tourism, in mining, and other things with international global companies that had the resources and the knowledge. And CEMEX didn't have the knowledge, and maybe had some resources, but not enough for all these industries to compete successfully. So there had to be a rethinking of the strategy. And in '89, late '88, early '89, the company decided to do a strategic audit. So there was a major effort in terms of acquiring knowledge of the industry, of the global cement industry, of the markets and the competitors. And through this effort and through the analysis of this information that was acquired, the company decided to change its strategy. Decided to refocus on cement, forget about petrochemicals, tourism. The 2 hotels that were being built were finished, but were sold later on. The company sold all its shareholdings of different companies, and thought that the only thing that the company would do was cement. If I say we, I'm still part of the company, really. So I'm no longer taking any decisions there, but well, my heart is there anyway. And so the fact is that the company decided to refocus on cement, as I was saying. And these were the 2 major strategic objectives that the company decided to take. One was to strengthen the Mexican market, CEMEX's position in the Mexican market, and also position the company as an international player, as a global player. And there were several things that the company had to do to achieve this. In the case of the Mexican market, because of the strong development that was happening in Mexico, there was the need for additional investment in new production capacity, but also the fact that as the market was becoming more, the construction industry was becoming more developed, more modern, the use of ready-mix concrete was a very important factor. Even though at that point in time there was, this is maybe something that I should have started with. Some of you might be familiar with what cement is and what concrete is, what ready-mix concrete and all these things that we see that we don't know exactly what they are. But cement is the powder, the gray powder that you don't see because you never, well, unless you've worked in a construction, you've never have seen cement. What you see is concrete, which is Well, no, this is probably gypsum, not concrete. But most likely, the floor is made of concrete, down, and the basement and foundations are made of concrete, which is the cement powder mixed with gravel, aggregates, sand, and water. And when you mix these things, you put it in place, and it stays there. It hardens, and it's now concrete. Now, in the case of the Mexican market, back then, 85, most of the cement, 90% of the cement, was sold in bags, because people would normally go buy bag cement and take it to his house and build another room, because the family was growing. Or start the construction of the house and would do it themselves. Most of the market was self-construction. But nevertheless, we thought clearly that that was going to change, and it's been changing, of course, very rapidly, as housing is something that is more of industrial size now. That is, when you're building houses in Mexico or in many other places in developing countries, you're normally building large projects where you have many houses built at the same time. For that type of construction, you would need ready-mix concrete. And that's why was one of the issues that the company needed to accomplish. In Mexico, remember at this point in time, when the company defined these objectives, CEMEX was only in Mexico. Now, the issue of the CEMEX position as a global player came about because of this recognition that the Mexican market was attractive for global competitors. And there was no way that CEMEX could defend its market from competitors that were present in many other countries. And so this brings another issue. The very important characteristic of the cement industry is that it's geographically affected because of the cost of transportation of cement. It's a rule of thumb that you would normally have a cement plant, and you can only transport cement about 200 miles around this plant. Out of that, it becomes uneconomical because of the cost of transportation related to the price of cement. The way the economists define this or name this is that it has a very low economic density. And so a ton of cement, which will probably be today in the region of $150 to $200 of price, if you sort of carry it in almost in any means of transportation, you will probably invest more than $60 or $70 if you go beyond this 200 mile radius. And so if you add that to the cost of manufacturing of cement, it takes the margin of the business. So it's not a good business. And so it's important for cement to have a geographic dimension. And that's why the first step in growing the company to an international player was to think of growing in the markets that were adjacent to the core market of the company. And the natural market for that was the Sunbelt of the US. That is the California, New Mexico, Arizona, Texas markets, where the company had exported cement previously, but in a very small way. In addition to that, because of the global competitors' presence in America, and some of them in Mexico already, it was important for the company to have some position in those markets that were important for these competitors, for these global competitors. Some of the names are here. At that point in time, Holcim was not, didn't have that name. The name was Holderbank. They changed it to Holcim. Later, Lafarge is French cement company. Blue Circle disappeared. Blue Circle was an English company and was acquired by Heidelberg, which is a German cement company. Italcementi is an Italian company, and then it's CEMEX. And there were many other companies. I just put here the most relevant ones. But the fact is that because of the presence of these large international companies in markets that were relevant to them, CEMEX wanted to have a position in these markets. And the fact is that although cement travels, I mean, it's a costly proposition to transport cement over land. If you transport it overseas, it travels longer, farther. And for example, in the case of a specialized vessel to transport cement from San Francisco to Japan, that can cost you in the region of $30 to $35 per ton. And that's, if there is the possibility, if there is the market, that could be an attractive business. It goes the other way, of course. And there has been cases where transportation of cement is convenient, even from the eastern coast of Spain all the way up Mississippi to places in the US where you wouldn't think that there is Spanish cement. Well, that has happened. So the development of the trading, the international trading business was also another important strategic aspect for CEMEX. And so that was the objectives that were set, and this was probably the later part of 1990 when we finally said, well, this is what we want to do. But we needed some sort of roadmap. See, where do we start? And we decided that this was something that could help us to understand where to go. And we defined two dimensions to our business. One was proximity of the markets. Proximity meant for us, at least at this point in time, that something had to be geographically close, but also culturally close. Because you could have situations in which a market was relatively close, but the business culture and the local culture would not necessarily something that CEMEX knew how to deal with. And so that was one issue. And on the other issue, on the other dimension was the attractiveness of the market, and in the sense that, well, this market is growing, that can have opportunities for CEMEX, either for acquisition or for the development of new capacity. And of course, those that were most attractive and closer to us were the markets where there was a high priority. Those are the ones that we wanted to be in. Those that were not so attractive, but they were close, we should look for opportunities to enter. Those that were unattractive and far away from us, ignore them. And then those that were very attractive but not necessarily close, we need to see if there was an opportunity that was very good for us. These are some examples of how we were looking at the world at that point in time. This is 1990, approximately. And I've just put some examples here. So you can see that the US Sunbelt is a very close market and very attractive for its growth. Culturally also, well, this is, as we know, the third country. 200 miles south and north of the border is a third country, really. We are a new country. But nevertheless, this was very attractive. The Caribbean was also very attractive because of the fact that there are many developing markets in the Caribbean that have no cement, because either the scale of the market is very small, or because they don't have the raw materials, or they don't have the energy. Cement requires a lot of energy to manufacture. Yeah, Venezuela, of course, we didn't know what was going to happen. It did happen. Colombia, Central America is close, but it's not as attractive because they're relatively small markets. Nevertheless, something that could be interesting. But what's interesting about, well, let me just talk about China. China is too far away and too unattractive at that point in time. I don't know what the company is thinking today, but anyway, what is interesting about this this chart, and that's why I put this broken line there with the arrows, is that as the company was progressing in its development, in its growth, the attractiveness of the markets and the proximity of the markets were increasing to the point that if you keep growing, then Germany becomes attractive and close. And in fact, even Argentina or China. But it's something that is very difficult to see when you're at that point in time. So that broken line and those arrows were not there in the initial presentation back in 1990. We started to draw those lines in 93, 94, when we realized, well, I mean, we knew what we wanted to do and what was the high priority. But it was until we realized those acquisitions, those growth steps, that we came to really face the benefits of globalization, of international growth. And we'll talk about them now. This is the list of things that we did over the years. Many, well, not many. One of them is no longer present in the company, that's Venezuela. I didn't put here the case of Indonesia, which never really happened. But most of them are still there somehow. I mean, 1985 to 1990, the company was, again, as I said, in this diversification process. So it was investing in cement, but in other things too. It was investing in acquiring companies within Mexico. And then in 1992 was the acquisition of the Spanish companies. That was a major step because the company had no previous experience in an international operation of the size of Spain. And the fact is that the decision was made to go for it because it was like, not the last chance, but we essentially saw that this was a good opportunity. The possibility of something similar to that happening to us in the future, if we didn't take this one, was very, very small. So we went for it. And of course, when you buy something, then you have to pay for it. And pay for it was hard. And to pay for it, we had to really make things as fast as we could and make them well. Now, it was relatively easy because these two Spanish companies that CEMEX acquired in 1992 were not necessarily the most efficient companies. So there were a lot of opportunities for creating synergies and efficiencies that allows to create, when we merged these two companies, the largest and most efficient cement company in Spain in a very short period of time. Now, the other benefit of that was that because we had to do it, we had to sort of create the system. And that was one of the major steps that the company took and created something that we'll see later was very, very, very strong. And it became stronger as the company grew. And that is the PMI system, the post-merger integration system that CEMEX created inside the company. There is a list there. I like better this chart. not, well, I could have placed the flags of the different countries on top of the bars, but it's a complex art, and I'm not that. I'm not as developed technically. But it's interesting to see how the size of the company changed along this 20-year period. One of the issues that you can see is 93, where we show suddenly a growth, and that is the acquisition of the Spanish companies. But then came the 94 tequila crisis, and of course, things went down. When that happened, the view was that we had a problem. Now, and I think that I remember writing this, and I think answering a question about the problems of the company at that point in time, saying that this is a glitch. I still think the same, but fortunately, this chart sort of gives me a reason to think that I'm the same. I'm thinking the same now, because as I see this chart, that situation that was a big problem at that point in time, when you see this chart, it doesn't appear that there was much of a problem. Now that's 94. Then you go on to 92, where there is 2002. I'm sorry, when there is another international issue. The U.S. had a major financial issue, not as bad as one that was that happened in 2008. But most likely, someone looking at this chart in 2025 will have the view that in 2008 there was a glitch. If, of course, the company keeps growing. The other interesting issue in this particular chart is that in 2005 you see a major growth in sales, but the EBITDA is not necessarily as strong. I'm sorry, the code is not there, but sales is the red bar and EBITDA is the blue bar. But 2005 is the first year after the acquisition of RMC, British-based company, but had operations in 18 countries, mostly in ready-mix concrete and aggregates. And so the ready-mix is a lower margin business. Cement is a higher margin business. So when you buy a company that's mostly ready-mix, most likely you have a lot of sales, but relatively low margins. So that's why there's a steep growth in sales, but not as proportionally in terms of EBITDA. And so after all this process, what happened is that CEMEX took a very strong position in the international arena. Whether the company was number 3, number 4, number 2, it's really not that important. But the fact is that it had acquired very strong positions in the world, in the relevant world for CEMEX. Because remember the chart, the 2x2, that was still the leading criteria for CEMEX growth. That was the roadmap. And so CEMEX was not growing just for growth. It was growing in a disciplined way where it should do it according to this roadmap. And so in terms of ready-mix, which was a very important issue for CEMEX, CEMEX, after the acquisition of RMC, was already the largest ready-mix company in the world. In terms of aggregates, are already a very important position. And in terms of cement, because of the strong presence of CEMEX in developing countries, proportionately had more ready-mix than cement. That's why the growth in terms of ready-mix is larger than in the case of cement. Well, this is what the company achieved along this 20-year period. But let's look at it in terms of numbers. It grew 22% average growth per year over a 20-year period, and 21% in terms of EBITDA, and that 21% lower than the 22% has the explanation I gave you of the ready-mix concrete margins being lower than cement. It was 100% Mexico in '85, and in 2005 was already only 36%. And one of the, let's say, internal objectives was that no market should be larger than 33% of the company. So to really create a diversification, a geographic diversification effect. Total assets were less than $1 billion in '85, came out to 26.8 billion. Market cap was 23 billion in '85 from 100 million. In terms of cement capacity, which is there in, it doesn't say there, but it's in million tons of production capacity, went from 10.7 to 97. Countries from 1 to 50, more than 50. Well, went up in terms of employment to up to 52,000. This is in numbers, but the quality, of course, is something that you cannot see there. But the quality of the company really changed. I mean, it was a major transformation. And here is a very brief discussion of the challenges that the company faced. I'm going to divide it into 4 fields, although you can combine them and talk about them in different combinations. On the strategical issues, we've talked about them, really. So I'm just going to give you some of the ideas of what the company was facing. First of all, there was the issue of growth through acquisitions. At some point in time, it gave me the impression that the public in general looked at companies that grew through acquisitions in a suspect way. So it was a little bit more legitimate to grow organically, that is, building new plants. Well, I guess that wasn't a decision of the company that had to do with the strategic impulse to diversify geographically because of the type of industry and the type of market and the type of company that CEMEX was at that point in time. And of course, the issue of the geographic diversification, we've talked about it, and why is it? Because of the logistic cost of cement. And the vertical integration issue I've talked about, and this is the ready mix and aggregates. We call this the cement value chain. And here is the 3 components of the cement value chain. Cement, which is the powder, aggregates, which is the gravel, the sand, and ready mix, which is the product in which these 2 go. And you put some water, there you are. Now, then there is the issue of the strategic temptations. Because of the fact that a company like CEMEX grows over the years and is successful, people tend to think that you can do everything. And then people start to think, well, then, if we are able to do this in cement, why don't we do this in other industries? Well, the fact is that we had already gone through that in the past, because when you start to think, well, you know, I can do these other things, you lose the focus. That is the central part of the strategic decision. That is, if a company like CEMEX, again, there are other companies that are different, but this is a company that has a knowledge base that is related to the cement industry and not to other industries. And so investing in other parts of the business, like, for example, construction. Well, CEMEX is a construction products company. It's a supplier of the construction industry. It's not a builder. But it's very easy to think, well, if I already have the main component of of construction. Why don't I do that? Well, the company had to sort of keep the discipline of not going into these other fields and concentrate in its resources in cement. But maybe go back to this, if I can. Then the issue of the operational challenges. As I said, I mean, CEMEX already had an operational culture. Back in '85, was recognized in Mexico as a company that was very strong in terms of cost containment, and as I said, maintenance was also very important. But really coming up to the cost standards of the international industry was something that the company didn't have, at least didn't have the view of that need. The mid-'80s also showed the company an issue. Because of the acquisition of Nahuac and Tolteca, the company had now plants all throughout the Mexican geography. But the management of this system was a bit difficult because of the lack of effective communication infrastructure. Telephone communications in Mexico back in those days were very difficult. So the company created a satellite system, a satellite-based system, to feed the information to the corporate offices. And this system that I mentioned here, the Graphoper, and that's the name that the company put into the system, was a very important part of the cultural transformation of the company. What this did is that it would put the daily information of each of the cement plants of the company into the computer of the CEO, but also of the other officers of the company. If I was a cement plant manager back in those days, most likely I would get a call from the CEO if he saw something in the information of the previous day that needed explanation, either because the cost of the consumption of energy was too high, because the clinker is a byproduct of the cement production, the clinker inventories were low, or whatever. Some issue, some disruption, the CEO would capture that, call the plant manager and say, what is happening? What happened to you, and what are you doing to correct that? If you wanted to keep your job, you better have that information at hand. And so, well, that was something that happened, but also because of the fact that that information was available to the rest of the executives, if I wanted to know what was happening in the company, if I was a second level or third level executive, and I saw that something was happening in a plant, I also could have a call with the plant manager. And so being a plant manager back then, of course, was something that you had to really take your pills because stress was high. Well, it still is, because that culture remained in the company. And somehow it is a basis for most of what the company is made as developing the management system. All is based on the fact that you have to know what is happening in your business. And not only what the problem is, but what is being done to solve the problem, and what are you doing for the problem not to happen again. A small anecdote. Most of the industry has this conception that there is no technology in cement. There hasn't been any real invention. Cement is being made today as it was made, but not 100, but maybe 60 years ago. There have been modifications to the manufacturing process, but once talking to one gentleman that owned a cement company in Chile, we were acquiring a participation in that company, and I was going to be a board member. And he was asking me, what are you bringing to to our company. And I slipped and I mentioned, well, some technology. And he said, well, I have more years in the cement industry than you have of age. So don't tell me that there is technology in cement. That's not true. And I said, well, perhaps I used the wrong word. But the fact is that if you have one plant, one cement plant, and you create some sort of synergy, some improvement, you probably create some savings. And let's say that you save $100 per month. But if you have two plants, and one plant creates one saving and the other develops another saving, and they share that, then you have $400 of savings. And if you have 50 plants, and all of them are improving, then you have technology, or something that you can call something else. But you have something that is very strong. That's different from having just one plant. And if you, but you have to have the system. If you don't have the system, you don't enjoy the benefits. Well, that's one of the issues that the company put a lot of attention to, that is creating all this system that allows the company to benefit from this process of improvement. And there's probably, you could use the word innovation, because you have to think of new things, of how to do things in a new way. But really, it's improvement, because there's no disruptive innovation here. It's really only improvement. Then, well, this line here is very important, because there was this issue about the CEMEX way. Someone used that name sometime, and sometimes names stick. But there was not really such a thing as the CEMEX way. So the thing that they called the CEMEX way was only the management accounting system. But the truth is that the CEMEX way was much more than that. The CEMEX way, in my view, is all these cultural aspects of managing a large company, large global company. And then, as already mentioned, the PMI system. Am I doing fine in terms of time? Okay. Well, yeah, I guess so.
15 minutes or so.
Okay, wonderful. Well, the fact is that the PMI system also is very important. A company that is growing, acquiring other companies, needs to have in place something that allows the taking of the benefits of the synergies. Because you buy something, and as I said, with the case of the Spanish acquisitions, you have to pay for it. And you better build the things that are going to pay for this. If you want to create a real return for your shareholders, the only way to do it is to create these resources. And this comes from being fast in benefiting from the synergies. This PMI system, when the acquisition of RMC happened, remember I told you it was 18 countries, operations in 18 countries. Let's say that the company did try to do it in a reasonable way and didn't go for the 18 countries in terms of the integration of these operations immediately. But at least 12 countries had to be taken over. And this takeover needed people. It was the team for this PMI at one point in time was 600 people. And I remember one colleague of mine asking me, how do you do that? How do you take 600 people from your current operations, put it into a team, take them out of the operation, and keep them there for 6 months? How do you do that? Because that's impossible. Well, it was possible because along the way, we learned that these PMI teams need to be in place always. That is, people had their normal job, but they were also part of the team. And when they were called, they had to go. They are in reserve, let's put it that way. And they had to go, and they had to think beforehand who was going to replace them, at least partially. Because there is a cost to it. I mean, there's no free lunch here. And the cost was that some of the operations would suffer a little bit. But there was the need for this fast PMI project, and so it had to be done that way. And so the PMI for RMC was 12 countries in 18 months. I'm sorry, in 3 months. And at the peak of these 3 months, there was 600 people involved in that. But that was also technology, if you want to call it that way, or knowledge base, or whatever you want to call it. The fact is that it's fundamental for the growth process. Now, the financial challenges. Because if you're growing, you need money. And you go to the market. Now, but you're a Mexican company in 1989. If you go to the market, they tell you, okay, here's the money, but it's 25% per year. That's too high. No one can pay that. So there had to be some sort of not really innovation, but the ability to tap the international markets for CEMEX to be able to get the resources for growth, to finance the growth at that point in time. The cost of capital in Mexico, CEMEX could have tapped the Mexican debt market, but it was very, very, very expensive. And equity was not really there. And so along the way, the company created this ability to go to the market and obtain resources for growth. Now, one of the issues, the way the company faced the challenge was through being very innovative and creative, but there was also the cost of complexity. Financial instruments, financial hedge instruments sometimes can be difficult to understand for the general public. It's not that they are dark science or something obscure, but the fact they are difficult. And we decided at one point in time that we would balance this. That is, if something was too complex, even if it was very good for the company, but if it was too complex for our market to understand, we wouldn't do it. That discipline was not always there. And sometimes we had problems. We had, let's say, misinterpretations of what we were doing. And at one point in time, more recently, the company was put in the same basket as companies that had really overextended themselves in terms of the use of derivatives in Mexico. It was not the case of CEMEX. CEMEX derivatives were always of operational nature. That is, were hedges of the CEMEX operations that were not speculative. Marketing. This is, an issue in cement is always this conception of this powder that we don't see, that you don't see. You don't buy cement. Well, some people do. And in Mexico, a lot of people were buying cement in bags. So the issue that was a commodity was something that we had to challenge, because this is, imagine this is 1994, and suddenly the market for cement goes down 30% in 2 months. And so you have a lot of cement, you have to sell it. Well, you start to think of ways of selling it that really create an advantage over your competitors. And that's why CEMEX challenged this idea that cement is a commodity, and saying, well, it's a consumer product. And I can create a distribution network and create media effects that allow me to get the top of mind of the buyer of cement, but also take the cement as close to this potential buyer as possible. That's why this effort on creating this distribution network was put in place, and it allows to get this knowledge of marketing cement. This process has gone on, and of course, so many different ideas have been put in place. And I think that the benefit of the Mexican situation has been spread to other markets of CEMEX in terms of marketing cement. Well, there is the issue of the corporate brand also, which I think it's an interesting one. When we acquired the Spanish companies, one of them was a very strong name in Europe, Valenciana. But it was strong because the owners were, let's say, were very famous. Their names were very, sounded a lot. Or put in another way, they appear in many social magazines. But it's not because the company was good. So the first idea was, let's keep the Valenciana name because it's a strong name. But at one point in time, about 3 or 4 years after the acquisition of these Spanish companies, we became convinced that the real good name, the real good story was CEMEX, and that was beginning to be recognized as a strong company because of what we had done in Spain. And so at that point in time, we decided to really use the name CEMEX. And if you see now, I guess it happens all around in the US, you can see the CEMEX ready-mix trucks going. They are the same all over the place. In the US, in Spain, in France, in London, in Manila, etc. In Colombia, of course in Venezuela, no longer, unfortunately. But so it became now an efficient, growing, innovative global building materials company. And that is the brand name that somehow has given the company possibilities for growth, for continued growth. I think there's just this slide that I'd like to, well, just read it almost. There are things that are underlying what has been created as a system within a company like CEMEX, and many other companies most likely have created something similar. But I think that these values I find very important. One is the change process. Many years ago, I read a book about the social psychology of organizations. And it really only was comparing how a human being grows as compared to how a company grows, an organization. And when a person is a very young child, does not know the risks that life has, and so goes through life, well, falls down, and most likely will have some bruises, and will stand up again, keep walking and running. And as you get older, you start to think of the risks that come with living. And there comes a time when, as an adult, you have all these rules, habits that are really ingrained, and that allow you to go through life without many problems, but nevertheless don't allow you to grow as much as you could if you were free to do whatever you wanted. Well, a company is very much like that. A young company normally keeps growing, and well, it's not that it forgets about the risks, but they don't look at the risks as something that is going to kill the company. Rather, much more like a challenge, an opportunity that have to be faced and somehow solved through the abilities of the company. Now, to keep that youthful approach to growth in a company is a very important issue. And the way that this was a consultant that gave us this phrase, she said, this company has a passion for growth. And this was 94, 95, I think. And somehow this reflected the age of the company. Although the company was almost 90 years back then, but 90 years old, but it had somehow acquired this idea that change was very important. The other value that is, well, not the other, a second value is the value of integration. Now here is what we call strategic focus, the fact that you concentrate on what you want to do, on what you know how to do, and be disciplined about these temptations that I talked about. And within this value of integration, there is the issue of standardization. Within CEMEX, there was a discussion, probably in the early 2000s, as to whether this creating one company, a standardized company that had the same systems, was really something reasonable, or if it was killing the creativity of the people. Well, there was one issue. On the one hand, CEMEX was in the same business all over the world. The cement production process is the same no matter where you are. Uses the same raw materials, the same technology. The product is used around the world in the same way. There's no differences in terms of the construction, major differences in different parts of the world. And your competitors are the same. You find the same usual suspects around the world. So why have different companies? So that was one rationale. But on the other hand, but you have to free the local mind so that they find their solutions. So don't standardize them. So these two forces were fighting against each other until someone said, but we're not going to standardize everything. You standardize whatever is repeatable, that there's no contribution of the human mind to that process, so that the human mind is free now. It has free time to innovate, to create, to think of new solutions, new customers, new products. So that is one value that is very important. And finally, the value of diversity. Once you are in a company that has so many different cultures within the company, you have to think how to create this corporate nationality, but also the respect for the local culture. And I have one example that is very, very interesting. Well, two examples, and I finish with it. One is the case of France. When we acquired RMC. Of course, it was this concept that France was difficult. Because the company was an English company. And so, well, there is a traditional, let's say, relationship between the British and the French. And so the British within the company were telling us, oh, these guys are difficult. Well, the fact is that in the end, the decision was to leave the French team as it was. There was no change to run the French operations, except for one small change, but very small. And for the following 18 months, that was the best team within CEMEX. And so this is an anecdote, of course, but it shows that if you have respect for the local culture, because what we said is we don't want to change the French culture. We want to change the CEMEX culture of business, or rather integrate this team to the CEMEX culture of business. There has to be this very careful consideration of the border of the interface between the business culture and the local culture. For example, hours, the time of the day at which the people go into the office. Do we change that, or we keep it one way or the other? Well, most likely, if you change it, it's going to be uphill. it's going to cost you much more than whatever benefit you think there is there. So you have to be very careful in those details. I was going to tell you about something else, because I said two. And I got carried away with it. I'll think about it. And if there's a question about it, I'll give it to you. But this is the end of the presentation. Thank you very much. And I'm ready now.